Today we celebrate the union of Arthur Valerian and High Priestess Meline of the Velvet Grove. Arthur's mouth twitched as he stepped slowly toward a lone figure cloaked in white. He walked barefoot through a grassy meadow, a ceremonial tradition of the forest folk. The sky glowed with the light of 2 large moons, and the wind carried the rich scent of tree sap. When he looked down, he saw he was dressed in a ceremonial robe of white and violet, the colors that marked nobility. Behind him stood a small crowd of humanoid figures who clapped softly. On one side were his people, those he had spent months guiding through the strange ascension trial. On the other stood the forest folk, his soon-to-be allies, whose support would help him prevail in his final confrontation and claim his place as a high noble. Music began to play. A soft melody filled the air as people cheered, and Arthur looked toward the lone figure waiting at the altar. She stood still, draped in a white dress and a long veil. Arthur couldn't help but notice the strange way the fabric clung to her body, making it difficult to tell what lay beneath. "I can do this. This is just a trial. None of this is real." He swallowed hard and stepped forward toward the person who was meant to become his wife. It was nothing more than a political marriage, much like the ones he had read about in real life. He had avoided this path during his first 2 attempts, but now he knew that without it, he would only fail again. Soon, he reached the forest altar and stood beside his bride-to-be, Meline. This was a purely political marriage, one in which he did not even know the true face of his future wife. The trial space had fast-forwarded through many events, making it difficult to follow everything that had transpired. In the past, he had spoken with the woman's father and worked to convince him that he would make a good husband. It had been a challenging task that required several conversations, the use of resources, and the elimination of rival suitors. Some were defeated in duels, while others were discredited through carefully spread rumors. He had stopped short of resorting to assassination, but only barely. Now he had finally arrived at this moment. Despite his nervousness, he kept reminding himself that this space was nothing more than an illusion. Once it was over, he would receive the ultimate reward, a prestigious lordly class that he could present with pride to his father. The ceremony continued. Arthur stood before the altar, heart beating slower now, but still the tension wasn't leaving his body. As the spirits of the grove bear witness. Forged through wool and sacrifice. Sealed beneath the 2 moons we will bring. The priest continued with a rather long speech. Arthur could hear some of the guests weeping tears of joy while all he wanted was to go home. Eventually, silence settled over the crowd and the priest stepped back. It was finally time for the ceremony to end. "Now, Arthur Valerian. You may unveil your bride and become one with the Velvet Grove." It seemed the ceremony was over. All that remained was to remove the veil, and then he would be recognized as the lawful husband of this woman. His hands moved slowly and trembled slightly. He brushed the silken veil aside and saw her face. The guests behind him began to cheer as the bride was revealed, but everything inside him went still. Her face was more or less what he had expected, but seeing it up close made it nearly impossible not to turn away and run. 2 large amber eyes blinked at him, framed by curled lashes. Her entire face was covered in white wool, soft and pristine, with an oddly puffy texture. Where a nose should have been, there was a small black snout that barely peeked out from beneath the thick fleece. She was not human. She was mostly sheep. Arthur had seen beastmen before, but most of them had only minor animal traits, like his maid Mary who had different ears and a tail. That was manageable. But this woman standing before him was far more animal than human. She could walk upright and speak, but she was undeniably more sheep than person. The same seemed to be true for the rest of the Velvet Grove. The priest who had officiated the ceremony was a large stag, with antlers rising high from his head. As the crowd applauded the ceremony's conclusion, Arthur only had one thought. This should be enough, right? The trial will jump to the next event now, right? The Ascension trial usually skipped past events like this, returning him to his domain or placing him inside his carriage. But this time, it did not work the way he had hoped. Instead of passing over the celebration, he found himself dancing with his new bride. Her hands were not human. Instead, she had fluffy cloven hooves that felt strange to hold. The 2 moons cast a silver glow over the grove as Arthur led her through the opening steps of the traditional dance. The music was sweet, slow, and surreal. Around them, animal denizens swayed and clapped in rhythm. This was not the first time the trial had caught him off guard. It had already taught him that becoming a lord required more than military strength. Politics, diplomacy, and charisma mattered just as much. Without gaining allies from every corner of this strange realm to impress the king, he had no chance of progressing. Drinking and partying followed. For some reason, the trial forced him to endure all of it as if mocking him. For several hours, he greeted guests and accepted their gifts with awkward formality. Some of them held real influence, and he was expected to give each one his full attention. But even when the festivities seemed finished, the ceremony continued. Now, he stood frozen before a large, ornate door. Why hasn't it ended yet? Do they really expect me to go through with this? Lord Valerian, please accept the ceremonial shears. Shears. A butler who resembled a goat handed him a cutting tool. It looked like a large pair of scissors. The goat-like servant gave him a wink and stepped away. Arthur stared at the door. His wife waited behind it. From what he had gathered, this tool was necessary for completing the marriage ceremony. Without finishing it, he would not receive the armies he needed to succeed. Dear husband, I'm ready. You can come in. Her voice was gentle yet hesitant. Arthur pushed open the door and saw her waiting on a massive bed. She was a round ball of fluff, so dense he could barely see her body. The shears made sense now. Without them, he could not proceed with the ritual. He stood at a crossroads. He was not sure he had the strength to go through with it. He took a few hesitant steps, reminding himself that this was only an illusion. His heart pounded loudly as he slowly moved forward. He slowly raised his head, but just as he did, something burst into view, startling him so badly that he nearly lost his balance. Would you like to skip this part of the event? Oh, thank the gods! He cried out in relief. A system window appeared before him, offering an alternative. The suddenness of it startled his bride, who nearly rolled off the bed. His hand trembled as he carefully selected the correct option, terrified of clicking the wrong one. The world around him began to blur. The familiar sensation of transition overtook him. It was finally over. He would not have to see this through. Perhaps now, he could finish the trial without failing again. No one can ever know about this. When the event ended, he was transported back to his castle. He was now a proper noble lord, commanding vast armies. His once solitary throne now had a smaller one beside it. His wife sat there, though much of her wool was now gone. He could only imagine what had taken place that night, and he vowed to carry that secret to his grave. Was that a sheep, and are those? Roland stood within the memory chamber, staring at the rapidly shifting flashes being uploaded into his console. His sharp eyes and heightened perception allowed him to catch more details than most. He had seen the strange wedding and caught a full view of Arthur's wife. It appeared they even had sheep children. The sight reminded him of his own trial involving a wooden puppet wife, a memory he had tried hard to forget. Are all these lord trials like this? What kind of twisted god comes up with these scenarios? Although he knew Arthur's trial was similar to his own, he had not expected it to force him into marriage. He could not decide what was worse, a wife made of wood who was also a puppet or a walking sheep. Mary, who had been standing nearby, heard him mumbling, and her large cat ears twitched. A sheep? She asked while narrowing her eyes. Oh. It's nothing, forget about it. More importantly, Roland realized Arthur would likely prefer to keep that part of the trial secret. A few images showed them together, but he could not tell how far the marriage had progressed. He quickly turned his attention elsewhere. The memories were flooding back, but something about the process felt different this time. The memories aren't getting erased. Mary caught the importance of his words immediately. They aren't? Does that mean? Yes. He must have succeeded in his trial. If the memories remained intact after the Ascension trial, then there was only one possible conclusion: he had reached the third tier of class advancement. After a few seconds, Arthur's fingers began to twitch. Suddenly, his eyes flew open. He jumped forward, nearly falling from the foldable chair, but Mary caught him just in time. Lord Arthur, you're back. Everything is fine now. Please be at ease. Why you? Roland moved around the console and approached Arthur. He knew that spending so long within the Ascension trial would leave him disoriented. By Roland's calculations, Arthur had spent more than a year there before being forced back into the real world. It would take him a few moments to regain his bearings. Take your time. You're back, and you were successful. Congratulations. Arthur sat in silence, his head shifting and his eyes scanning the white room and the surrounding runic equipment. Slowly, his memories returned. Just like Roland before him, he realized that he had made it back. I did. Arg. His joy was brief. The pain hit him as his internal transformation began. His organs, bones, and muscles were torn apart and rapidly reassembled into a stronger form. It was a brutal process. Fortunately, Roland had prepared several pain-dampening spells, and within moments, Arthur no longer felt anything. Just lie down for now. Let the transformation happen. Don't fight it. Roland activated his identification skill and observed the changes taking place within Arthur's body. The transformation was immense, even more dramatic than what Robert, his older brother, had experienced. Meister instead of a master. Name: Arthur Valerian L151. Classes: T3 Dual Meister High Lord L1. T2 Aura Duelist L50. T2 Spirit Fencer L50. T1 Sword Warrior L25. T1 Warrior L25. Without hesitation, Roland took a quick glance at Arthur's status screen. The class Arthur had received followed a naming pattern similar to the Runesmith High Lord variant Roland himself could have chosen in the past. Due to Arthur's current state and lack of defensive barriers, Roland was also able to view his most personal skills and, more importantly, the stat multiplier. Dual Meister High Lord. Class: this class grants an 80% bonus to HP, MP, and SP. The stamina cost of using aura and aura-related skills is reduced by 40%. Tier 3, High Lord. Trait: adds a multiplier of 4 to all of the basic stats, with the exception of luck and charisma. That sounds quite similar to my Overlord class. The benefits just focus on stamina and aura instead. The similarities were obvious. If Roland had chosen the High Lord path, he would have received the same multiplier of 4 instead of the 4.5 that came with his current class. High Lord's Aura. Active skill. When High Lord's Aura is activated, all aura-based attacks become more powerful for 5 minutes. During this time, their cost is reduced by 50%. He even gained a skill similar to Overlord's Might. As Arthur struggled to collect his thoughts, Roland continued reviewing the skills he had received. Some appeared to be slightly weaker versions of his own abilities, while others were more distinct and unique. High Lord's Charisma. Passive skill. Increases the High Lord's charisma, making it easier to persuade and charm others. Dual Meister Swords/Blades. Passive skill. Improves proficiency with swords and other bladed weapons. This proficiency increases further during one-on-one duels. Aura Master. Passive skill. Enhances the user's aura flow and increases aura-based damage. Stamina Surge. Active skill. Boosts stamina recovery speed by 50% and increases total stamina by the same amount. That covered the main skills Arthur had gained. Most of them enhanced his combat effectiveness and aura control. With this many improvements, Arthur could likely use his strongest techniques for longer periods, delivering devastating strikes without suffering the usual drawbacks that aura users faced. Aura was a powerful force, but it was also known to deplete quickly. You really did it, Arthur. Congratulations again. Roland nodded slightly as he reviewed the assortment of skills. Arthur had managed to receive a powerful Tier 3 class, one that would make many nobles envious. While Roland wasn't sure what the other Valerian brothers had received, it was hard to imagine anything surpassing the High Lord class granted to Arthur. Ha! It's finally over, right? While Roland admired his noble friend's achievement, Arthur seemed more relieved than proud. Roland understood that feeling well. After leaving the world filled with wooden puppets, he too had needed time to come to terms with everything. Unfortunately, Arthur had little time to reflect as they would need to depart soon. Their visit to Isgard was less than a day away, and there was little left to do besides rest. Yes, it is, Lord Arthur. Please allow me to help you up. No, thank you, Mary. I can stand on my own. Thanks to the recovery runes Roland had implemented, Arthur's body had healed much faster than expected. He no longer needed assistance, and his mind had finally begun to recover. However, as he stretched, Mary said something that nearly shattered his composure. As you wish, Lord Arthur. But Sir Roland, what was that about sheep? Roland froze. Arthur froze as well and his eyebrows twitched slightly. Mary raised an eyebrow, uncertain what was happening. She glanced toward one of the screens still displaying fragments of memories from the Ascension trial. She took a step towards one of them, but Roland quickly blocked the path forward. It was nothing. I just thought we might get some wool for the bedding. Roland quickly waved his hand and shut off the power to all the screens in the chamber. He watched Arthur's face go pale as the realization sank in. Someone else had seen the memory. Why don't you take Lord Arthur back to his mansion? I'm sure he's hungry and needs some rest. He started coughing loudly and acting strangely. Mary narrowed her eyes, but after seeing her weary lord nod repeatedly, she gave in. Yes, of course. Arthur let out a sigh of relief as he rose from the chair. Roland stepped behind him, placed a hand on his shoulder, and whispered quietly. Don't worry. Your secret is safe with me. I've already destroyed all of the evidence. Thank you. You are truly a friend. A small tear formed in Arthur's eye as he nodded and moved ahead. With everything settled and his advancement to Tier 3 complete, it was finally time to depart for the main city of Isgard. He wasn't sure what awaited them there, but if all went smoothly, it would be nothing more than a dull ceremony. After a few uneventful days, he hoped to return and focus on the dungeon once again. He still wanted to achieve more levels, something he still desperately needed. The sound of metal striking metal echoed through the stone walls of Roland's workshop. Sparks burst from the glowing piece of metal as he brought his hammer down again, driving the precise curvature into the steel with the same kind of obsession he reserved only for his finest works. His eyes, shielded behind thick work goggles, remained wide open, focused on an enhanced view. With each strike, a display lit up, revealing a series of numbers and small diagrams that only he could interpret. Sweat dripped down his brow toward the glowing anvil, but the drop vanished in a hiss of steam before it could land. He kept hammering, faster and faster, as if racing against time. The weapon he was shaping began to take form, becoming something long, thin, and sharp. His hand moved in a blur as magic crackled with every blow, charging the metal not only with heat but also with raw magical energy. The blade's final shape emerged, revealing the profile of a weapon typically used for heavy rapiers. Nearby, an ornate hilt sat ready, assembled and waiting for the completion of the most vital piece. Roland did not pause until he was certain the metal was ready for the final stage. Only then did he stop and turn his head toward his assistant, Bernier, who was waiting nearby. He gave a silent nod, and the ornate hilt was lifted and brought over. This was the most critical part of the process, the fusion of the blade and hilt. The metals used in this project were notoriously difficult to work with. Once they cooled, they could not be reshaped without being destroyed, as the heat required to do so would have to be many times greater than what was currently being applied. Roland exhaled slowly, steadying his nerves as he placed the newly forged blade onto a specialized setting table. At first glance, the table seemed unremarkable, lacking any visible components to support a blade or a hilt. But as soon as he brought the blade closer, a series of runes began to glow. Tiny threads of mana danced along the surface and soon connected with the blade, vanishing from sight to anyone without magical perception. The blade began to float in midair, held in place by a magical spell that continued to generate heat and keep the metal malleable. Bernier stepped forward and pressed the hilt into position from one end. His entire body was wrapped in layers of protective material that concealed his form completely. While Roland could endure the heat and magical forces with nothing but his own body, a more common craftsman like Bernier needed protection from the hazardous energy. Soon, the hilt slid into place with a sharp hiss that echoed through the chamber. The fusion was not only physical but also magical. As the pieces joined, the metals merged seamlessly, and the pre-crafted rune traces aligned and bonded with perfect precision. Roland remained focused on the task, his hand resting on the charring blade without harm. He guided the mana in the correct direction, ensuring the hilt settled into place exactly as intended. Once satisfied, he gave a nod to Bernier, signaling him to step back. It stabilized. The hilt application sequence was successful. While the two craftsmen focused intently on their work, a voice echoed through the chamber, seemingly coming from every direction. It was Sebastian, observing the entire process and recording it for future reference and analysis. Roland understood that there were always aspects that could be improved. He also hoped to eventually automate these procedures, so collecting detailed data on his custom creations was essential. "We did it, boss." "Not quite yet. It still needs some work." "You mean the decorative gems?" "Don't worry, I'll handle that in no time. Just leave it to me." Roland nodded as he watched the hilt and blade enter a specialized cooling phase. Unlike other metals that could be quenched in water or oil, this mithril blend was far too volatile for conventional methods. Instead, structures resembling tuning forks emerged from all sides of the bench where the blade had been assembled. While Bernier could not see much with the naked eye, waves of mana began to strike the sizzling blade from every direction, rapidly cooling it in a controlled and even manner. Once it was finally safe to handle, his assistant grabbed a pair of tongs and carefully moved it to another workstation. Although the blade was now fully forged, it still required ornamental details worthy of the noble who would one day wield it. As the newly forged blade was set gently onto a padded resting block, its pale silver surface shimmered under the soft glow of the workshop's runic lamps. To the side, another sword, identical in every measurable aspect, lay on a red velvet cloth. Roland walked over and stood above this other rapier, and picked it up. Name: Aura Lord's Right Rapier. Classification: Rare Plus. Durability: 70/70ths. Attack rating: B+. Set bonus: 2, plus 20 agility/dexterity. Roland raised an eyebrow as he examined the weapon. Originally, it had no set bonus, but now that he had nearly completed the twin blade known as Aura Lord's Left Rapier, this one had gained a set effect. Set bonuses were rare, as most weapons functioned as stand-alone items. However, exceptions occurred when the weapons were designed for classes that specialized in dual wielding. What he held was a heavy rapier, though to him it felt as light as a feather. Compared to some weapons that resembled tree trunks in size, this one was sleek and elegant. As he examined it, he had to admit he had come a long way since his last Ascension trial. If his creations were now judged purely on style, he was confident his score would be much higher. A weapon fit for a lord. Although Roland wasn't an aura user himself, he could mimic the energy to some extent. This particular weapon had been crafted precisely to enhance Arthur's aura-wielding abilities. With it in hand, Arthur would be able to fully unleash his power without risking overload from his class's rarity. While rare classes often granted immense strength, that strength could backfire and overwhelm lesser equipment. Roland understood this better than most. Even his own armor and runes constantly required maintenance and careful monitoring to prevent deterioration. He had the skills to repair and reinforce his gear when needed, but Arthur did not. That meant the weapon could not fail him, no matter the circumstance, as his life depended on it. Roland carefully set down the rapier in his right hand, then turned to the newly forged blade that was nearly finished. The aura of heat had long since faded, allowing Bernier to complete the final touches by attaching a large decorative gem to the end of the hilt. Although it resembled a mana stone, its purpose was far less significant, and its durability matched that of the sword itself. Even if struck, the gem would not chip or detach. Roland had chosen the pieces with care to complement his latest creation, which was meant to serve not only as a weapon but also as a symbol of wealth. "Don't worry, boss. I can finish this by myself. Why don't you prepare for your trip instead? I'll leave the rest in your care then." The assembly of the two weapons had begun immediately after Arthur completed his class change, although the preparations had started much earlier. With most of the work already done, the final step only required selecting the appropriate runes, shaping the blade, and attaching the hilt to the weapon. The design and appearance of the weapons had mostly been decided by their future owner, who was expected to receive them within a few hours. Before leaving, Roland glanced at his assistant, who seemed to be enjoying the work. Bernier's level was approaching 150, and it looked like he would soon reach Tier 3. "I'd rather keep this quiet for now, but I suppose there's no helping it." He moved forward, reflecting on the meaning behind this assembly. Although they had defeated many monsters and managed to liberate a city from Theodore's control, it did not mean they had won the culling event. Still, their actions were likely to draw attention. Nobles and shadowy figures alike would examine them closely, trying to understand how such a group could rise so quickly and produce so many Tier 3 individuals in such a short time. I wish I knew what that Duke was really after. It still bothered him. The reason for the assembly remained unclear, and it felt as though he was willingly walking into the belly of a beast. He had no idea what the Valyrian house was truly planning. In the worst-case scenario, the gathering was a trap designed to bring all the brothers and nobles together for a different kind of culling. Although the likelihood was low, he couldn't ignore the possibility that they might be attacked during the journey. What made things worse was the knowledge that his magical gear would likely be confiscated. The armor he wore was embedded with a large number of custom-made runes and crafted from rare, expensive materials. In modern terms, it would be like bringing a machine gun to a cocktail party. There was no chance he would be allowed through the front entrance with equipment like that, so he either needed to remove it entirely or find a trench coat large enough to hide the equivalent of a machine gun beneath it. Fortunately, he had the largest coat this world could offer, spatial runes capable of holding enough gear to fill an aircraft hangar. The challenge was sneaking it all in without being detected, which could turn out to be either surprisingly simple or frustratingly difficult. As he walked forward, his gaze settled on the array of armor and weapons on display. Each piece glistened and radiated power. Wearing even one of them to the gathering would spare him a great deal of trouble, but he knew that was out of the question. Instead, he needed to approach this with strategy and precision. He stepped into his armory, where all his elemental armors stood on display across the racks. Just a day earlier, he had worn the salamander set to battle plant-based lesser dragons. He approached the scaled red armor and pulled something from it, a card. It looked like an ordinary playing card, the King of Hearts, but it was far more than that. As he channeled his mana into it, glowing runes activated, and the armor vanished, pulled into the spatial pocket hidden within the card. This seemingly simple piece of paper now stored an entire suit of armor. When the rune was activated again, the card would ignite like a scroll, releasing the armor. Even if the card were destroyed, he had the coordinates of the spatial pocket memorized, so the armor would never be truly lost. It was a clever trick, but he had learned not to rely on a single solution to a problem. At first, he had considered storing every suit of armor inside the deck of cards. The thought of compact, portable access to his arsenal was tempting, but he hesitated. If the guards ever confiscated the cards, he would be left defenseless. It was better to avoid putting all his eggs in one basket. So he decided to diversify his approach. Now he held a silvery clasp, the kind used to secure a cape, engraved with the Valyrian crest. This would store his all-purpose mithril armor. Other tools and pieces of gear would be hidden using similar tricks, each stored in a different item to minimize risk. A soft light began to pulse throughout the armory as the suits of armor disappeared one by one from their racks. Only once they were all safely stored did he turn away and head toward the elevator. He stepped outside and walked toward his house, where his wife was already waiting. He wasn't planning to wear one of his more powerful armors to the meeting, but that didn't mean he would go completely unprotected. The High Knight Commander was still known for runic equipment, so it would be suspicious if he came wearing nothing at all. This takes me back. He stood in the living room, clad in armor that resembled his old Tier 2 runic set. It lacked the imposing presence of his more advanced suits, but it carried a sense of familiarity. Elydia looked at him with a small, wistful smile. She stepped closer and let her fingers trace the silvery clasp on his shoulder, her touch lingering on the familiar weight of the cape. The fabric shimmered softly in the morning light, catching the glow alongside the metallic wristbands and chest plate. The red goes well with the rest of it. You've become quite the gallant knight. Her words awoke a memory. He recalled the day she used her sewing kit to attach his first real knightly cape. It had been the first time he stood before others as a proper knight commander. Since then, he had come far, rising to a position far greater than that. I'm sure you're tired of hearing this, she said, adjusting the cape with care. But please be careful. Come back in one piece. When she finished, she stepped in for a slow embrace. He returned the hug and opened his mouth to offer a few comforting words, but a series of sharp howls outside interrupted the moment. Agni pushed his wolven snout through the window, and his movement caused the building to shake. It looks like Agni might be more worried about me leaving than you are. Elydia chuckled as she watched the red wolf trying to squeeze through the window. The wooden wall holding the frame began to buckle under the pressure, and it was only when Roland jumped in to push against him that the sound of splintering wood finally stopped. Agni let out a whine, clearly unhappy about being left behind. Roland grunted as he braced himself against the frame, his boots digging into the polished floor. Stop it, Agni. They wouldn't allow you inside Isgard. You would just end up spending the night in the horse stables or locked in a cage. Awoo. Roland managed to push him back, but even he struggled against the power of his sunlight wolf. Without his proper runic equipment to assist him, Agni's larger body strength became even more apparent. Elydia, meanwhile, continued to laugh at the scene unfolding before her. Is this because I didn't take you into the dungeon? Woof. As soon as Roland mentioned his recent dungeon expedition, Agni jumped back and started barking at him loudly. Roland grew concerned that his companion might give away his position or fall victim to the spores. While Agni was a powerful ally, he lacked the ability to stay quiet or calm in tense situations. Even now, he was frightening the shopkeepers and alarming the guards stationed outside with his howling. Okay, stop. I promise that once I'm back, I'll take you to the dungeon. His eyes narrowed as if testing whether Roland was serious. After a long pause and one final low growl, Agni backed away from the window, his enormous tail swinging like a crimson propeller. Roland sighed and shook his head, brushing wood splinters off his shoulder. Elydia was still smiling, her amusement barely contained as she handed him a leather-bound satchel. Here. Documents, all the permits, the invitation, and your lunch. You packed lunch for a High Knight commander. He raised an eyebrow as he peeked into the satchel, finding some neatly assembled sandwiches along with a few other items. No. I packed lunch for my husband, who is always too busy to eat. He gave her a soft, appreciative look before tucking the satchel beneath his arm. Thanks. Just try not to kidnap any noble ladies again. I'll try. He chuckled, then leaned down to place a kiss on her forehead. With one last glance at Agni, who was now lying outside, he stepped back into his workshop to retrieve the newly finished heavy rapiers. With them in hand, he made his way through the underground tunnels toward Arthur's estate, where his entourage was already waiting. It was time to enter the belly of the beast, and he could only hope he had made enough preparations for what lay ahead.